we have some lights? How was that? Now, as I mentioned, as luck would have it, I was going to do this show, this program, and my wife delivered our son early, so we had to get somebody. No. But that was very kind of you. And so we got, as luck would have it, we got two great people to come on with our filmmakers and do the program with us. And oddly enough, for a film about two men that are these incredibly smart men, we have two incredibly smart men with us. And where are you, David? David, come out here. You're going to introduce them. Oh, I am. You introduce them.
Oh, really? Okay.
So first, let's have the filmmakers.
Okay. So one of the filmmakers had a film here, Morgan Neville, called 20 Feet from Stardom 2 years ago. We're really excited to have him back. So Morgan Neville and Robert Gordon, the two co-directors of Best of Enemies, come on out. And then Dick Cavett, subject of the movie, a legend, please come out. And stay out. And we're lucky to have our moderator for tonight, Kurt Andersen. Kurt?
Do your best.
It is my pleasure to be here. There are not that many things that would get me to come out to East Hampton on a Saturday night, but this is one of them. What a great film, and it is the second time I've seen it, and it is richer and better the second time. Happy to be here with Morgan Neville, happy to be here with Robert Gordon, happy to be here with my fellow former Nebraskan, Dick Cavett, as well. So first of all, I want to ask the audience, I guess by applause, since we can't see you, with political sympathies aside, who would you rather hang out with? William F. Buckley or Gore Vidal? Gore Vidal. Buckley.
Let's hear from the other two of you.
Yeah. So, Morgan and Robert, is that, I mean, as you've shown this film, it's not been formally released yet, but you've shown it to a lot of audiences. Do people... do they respond more positively to Vidal? Because I gotta say, I mean, politically, I'm more on Vidal's side of the barricades than Buckley, but I came away liking Bill Buckley.
Well, I think it was one of the revelations for us is my first job out of college was working for Gore Vidal as his fact checker at The Nation magazine, which was the worst job I ever had in my life. Because I'd call him on the phone in Ravello, this is before the internet, and tell him he'd gotten very small facts slightly wrong, and then I would pull the phone away from my ears. He yelled at me. And you know, again, my political sympathies are with Gore, but Buckley was kind of a revelation to me in that most of his friends were liberals. He lived in New York. He told one of his conservative friends upon moving to New York, don't hang out with the conservatives, they're boring, hang out with the liberals. And I'd love to hear what Dick has to say about this, but certainly I think he had a very open-minded point of view about people he wanted to associate with off camera. And many people would say they'd go on his show and they'd have a very contentious debate on air, and the moment the camera stopped, he'd say, oh, do you want to go get a drink? And he would be completely civil. And I think kind of enjoyed the theater of debate more than the actual kind of believing in the political animosity.
I didn't know you had a connection to him. My only connection to Gore Vidal is when I was running Spy Magazine, we called him litigious in an article once. He then threatened to sue us for having called him litigious. But then he was nice and made up. I saw him 20 years later. He couldn't have been nicer about it. In 1968, I didn't see this live. I was in the woods somewhere, and I was 13 years old. You were an infant. How did you guys get to this subject as a film?
That's Robert.
A friend of mine had the same bootleg copy of the debates that Gore had in Ravello, and Tom Graves shared it with me. I was like, oh, this is fascinating, and then I saw it and was really struck by our contemporary culture wars being expressed in 1968, and knew there was a documentary film in this. Morgan and I had made a few films earlier, and I called him up and said, "You got to see this DVD."
And are the audiences that you've shown it to so far people like many in this room who were alive in 1968, or have you shown it to younger people? And I'm wondering what young people make of it.
I'll say that I, in the making of it, shared it with my teenage daughters, who barely know who I am and certainly don't know who these guys are, and they were fascinated. So, and we showed it at the Brooklyn Academy of Music last month, which had an audience that probably all 500 of them together equaled our age on stage, and again, they're totally taken by it.
This is the year in which I was asked, among other things, who were the Marx Brothers and who was Johnny Carson? Does that give you a sense of tempus fugiting? You want to know how I met Bill Buckley?
Please.
I'm merely asking. We were destined to be friends. He was on my very first week in the daytime on ABC, my first show in '68. And I was scared. I was scared for the first 3 weeks of doing a 90-minute show, never having done one, and seeing myself signaled and then realizing, my God, I forgot what the guest was saying or who the guest is, and his lips have stopped moving, and oh, geez, and that's where your mind was going. And I was especially scared of Buckley. I had seen him lecture at Yale as a guest lecturer, and my English prof had said, go see this man. I consider him the most dangerous man alive in America today. And I liked his histrionics. I thought he was interesting. And I didn't remember anything later except a couple phrases like the mental spastics who read The Nation, that sort of thing. So there he was on the show. And somehow I said about something, I'm not familiar with that. And he said, you don't seem to be familiar with anything. And the audience went, ooh. And I thought, you prick. This is my first week. I don't know how I'm doing this, and you're formidable, and so on. You'd never dream that years later I had great times with him in various places on and off camera. I once hurt him a little by telling him that his quote from Oscar Wilde was La Rochefoucauld, but he took it nicely in front of the audience and said, I come here to be educated. But watching this, there's that strange thing about him, that part about homosexuality in the end, and somebody says, partly it was affect, that those bizarrely feminine, fluttering eyelids and mouth movements and seductive movements of his face would, of course, suggest such a thing. And those who wanted to think so took it and ran with it. But
You were, Dick, you were as a boy, working for Jack Parr when the two of them went on successive nights when Jack Parr was hosting The Tonight Show. Did you have a sense then of these are formidable characters who should someday be in a studio together?
well, that was so far back that I didn't know who Gore was, probably. I had 3 television sets on my bedroom floor, and I was one of, I find, very small number of people who can clearly say, I happened to see the historic moment. Not very many actually did. I don't know why. Partly because ABC was, as I once put it during a war with them, the 8th of 3 networks, and that did me a lot of good. And it's as simple as ABC. A couple things. Anyway, self-destructive streak. But you know what's interesting? There's a segment, I hate to say this, uncredited in this from my show, which is that segment where you see Norman and Gore. You all recognize my set,
Yes.
probably.
December 1971.
Well, I work alone. So, Milton Berle. The audience applauded when Norman, who was had visited a couple of what he called watering places on the way, and entered with that pugilistic stride of his. And interestingly, many people, in fact recently, will say, how did you stand it that notorious night on your show when Buckley and Vidal got into that thing? Well, that wasn't on my show. They both, the notorious night was that bit you saw with Norman. But here's what's interesting about that. Norman said, you want to just talk to me, Gore? Because I'm trying to get yucks from the audience. You could just talk to me. And that sentence that Gore came up with, and that man is wrong, that Gore had to work out his ad libs. He had some favorite lines he reused, but the sentence that he came up with was, I'd be happy to talk to you, Norman, but we don't happen to find ourselves in the friendly neighborhood bar, but by election in front of a studio audience, and it would be dishonest of us to pretend otherwise. And the audience applauded the beauty of the sentence. It happened a couple of times with Gore. They just loved.
Bring that back.
Yeah.
Bring those times back.
He could do that. Jonathan Miller, we should all be able to talk like that. There's a thing Gore wrote after this. Did you guys come across this? In Esquire, probably. And in it, he referred to the clan of the many, many Buckleys as the sick Kennedys, and told an incident of how young Buckley children of obviously various ages took a little boat across to a little place across from where their big home was and desecrated a synagogue. And it seems to have been forgotten. I don't know if that particularly was what the suit Buckley caused or not. Do you?
They're the
Well,
filmmakers.
yeah, and so there's even a moment in the aftermath of the blow-up in that debate when Gore says, "What about Sharon, Bill?" And he's
That was?
he's referring to Sharon, Connecticut, the town where Bill grew up, and this incident that Gore knew about that had happened. The truth being told, Bill was off at college. Bill was not even living at home when this happened. Yeah. But Gore, in this essay in Esquire, intimated the best he could that Bill had been part of this incident, and it had been, I guess it was actually a church that the wife of the pastor was a real estate agent who had started selling homes to Jewish families in Sharon, and some kind of quasi-Vargas type illustrations and honey were poured on chairs in this church, and it was seen potentially as a statement against this wife who had started inviting Jewish families into the community, and Gore used that in this piece amongst many of the other things we
have to be generous.
decided.
They were young, and which of us haven't desecrated synagogues at some point?
One of the points you make in this film that I think is so extraordinary watching this is in 1968 we cannot overstate how extraordinary it was to see this kind of emotion on the television news. Now, of course, today we have channels devoted to this as a format, and we have Donald Trump. So, it's not such a thing. But before it became a kind of professional wrestling thing to have arguers on television, there was something, certainly in Firing Line, certainly when when Vidal was on Dick's show, there was something bracing and wonderful about, as you say, people speaking complete sentences about important things. Should the Charlie Roses of the world, the NPRs of the world, be stirring it up more and having people who hate each other on the air more?
Well, not to answer that, because I don't think I can, but would they have, there was no tape delay, was there? There wasn't tape.
Right.
Was there, could they have blipped that in time as they do now? So you're full of, buddy.
Yeah.
You can always, everybody knows what they said. But was there any sense of censoring that? Any possibility of it?
I don't think so. From what we've been told, no. That it was live.
You heard it as it was said, and there wasn't a 6-second. Yeah.
But what you're asking about is not so much that moment as
Today.
the whole build-up prior to that moment of the long, letting the fuse have a burn. And I think that's what is missing is, let's not come back from the commercial and see the heads knock against each other, but instead, what if one side speaks a full thought and the other side speaks a full thought and they disagree and they take it somewhere and maybe they both end up somewhere where they hadn't expected. It's a proper
Although,
discussion.
what's interesting,
it's not talking points.
given that it was this success, it doubled their ratings for their convention coverage and all that. It's apart from Jack Kilpatrick and Shayna Alexander. It took a long time for television to figure out that this was a thing it could do regularly.
So it seems, yeah. People always say to me, nobody does what you did. And I'm always surprised. I don't know what it is I did that nobody does, except I often had a guest for 90 minutes rather than 7. But Colbert and Stewart both brilliantly managed to get laughs and content into a 7-minute segment. Believe me, it's much easier to do 90 minutes than it is 7. And guests get better and better and more careless and a little tired, and you end up with an illustrious person you've admired all your life saying, how did you get me to talk about that? That whole thing about my wife. But much light can come from that sort of thing. I don't know, maybe the taste is gone. Maybe the pace of television. The worst thing about news and talk on television is that thing CNN and everybody does, where somebody comes on and they're talking interestingly and their whole face is on the screen. And then they mention, well, they just did it today on Bill Cosby. They mention Bill Cosby and you want to hear what they're going to say. And they're put this size in the corner and we see a screen full of Bill Cosby with no sound, talking and talking and no sound, and oh God, what was that person saying? They do it with politicians, and they just make them postage stamp size, and we show, because they mentioned New Orleans when I ran for office, we see Mardi Gras. What is that called, that thing? What it says is nothing this person is saying is nothing that's on the screen is worthy of your full attention. So we'll give you this up here, this over here, and yes, they said Vietnam, and there are tanks in Vietnam, and the thing running across the bottom, and the temperature at the top.
It's one of the reasons we like radio, Dave,
Yeah.
because people have to listen. Morgan and Robert, one thing I'm interested in, knowing you had made this film, I fully expected to see Chris Buckley, Bill's son, who's a great talker, obviously has complicated feelings about his father. I expected him to see him in the film. Why did he not decline to participate?
Well, he did decline. We went to him early. This film was 5 years in the making. We started it in 2010. And we went to him early, middle, and end. He was a teen on set in Chicago when the incident happened. And my own interpretation is that this is a festering wound in the family. It never healed, and he did not want to do anything, one, against his father's legacy, and also to not perpetuate the wound. I think that it's just a guess.
Yeah.
But
one thing you don't answer, and we can all make our own judgments or speculations, is was Buckley upset about losing his cool or about calling somebody a goddamn queer on television?
I think he was upset about losing his cool.
Losing his cool, absolutely. And Chris Buckley wrote a memoir of his parents called "Losing Mom and Pup," and in that he talks about taking after his father passed away, the file cabinet labeled Vidal that had been living in his father's office for many, many years, and the kind of psychic relief with which he threw this file cabinet into the dumpster, and that Buckley had always refused to ever take the bait whenever people brought up Vidal in interviews over the years, and I think it was the name which you were never supposed to speak. But
he didn't watch it over and over and over again.
And Vidal
never
missed the chance to throw Buckley under the bus whenever his name was brought up.
Well, I'm sorry Chris Buckley didn't do it, because he's a wonderful talker, and he also wrote that. You can go home and Google Chris Buckley, the debate, and see the piece that he wrote about it after his dad died. But has anybody ever pointed out that even at the time when I first saw it, I thought, who wrote that bad line for Buckley? You queer, I'll sock you in your goddamn face. I'll goddamn sock you in the face, and you'll stay plastered.
I
Now,
know.
that isn't a line you'd write for John Wayne or a brutal Ernest Borgnine.
Yeah.
It's mid-Victorian.
Yes. George Sanders on a bad day. We have time for some questions if there are people who have questions, and there are microphones offered to you to ask them if you have them. Great.
When Nixon appointed Bill to be a delegate to the United Nations, he needed a State Department, and the State Department appointed me to that rather cherished position, actually. Yes, is this better?
Much.
All right. So my experience with Bill was that despite his wit and his willingness to be argumentative, and also his willingness, more than willingness, eagerness to criticize the government, he was quite willing to take instruction about any of the details of dealing with the intricacies of American diplomacy or the State Department's, should I say, labyrinthian division. So my experience with him was that he was a very kind person when he was in a position wanting at least to learn about something he was interested in and appointed to deal with. So incidentally, to wind up this discussion, he never made a pass at me.
Oh, come on, tell the truth. Oh, Lord. I apologize to the next questioner. I swore I wouldn't tell this because it takes a full minute. But it's a stunt that Bill Buckley pulled. It's never been known. Down in the Caribbean, I ran into him. He said, come aboard the boat. And he had Mr. Clurman of Time magazine there. And in the sail down, Bill had put Band-Aids all over his typewriter and taught him to touch type at an advanced age. But then he said, we were talking the other night, and Clurman said, I said to Clurman, you know, they're broadcasting The Wizard of Oz, and I want to see it. It's coming over from St. Thomas, 8 o'clock tomorrow night. And Clurman said, I've never seen The Wizard of Oz. And Bill said, I was absolutely stunned. So I said, we must see it. The time came that next night, and it was 8:15, and he said, oh my God, we must turn it on. You've missed the first 15 minutes. I'll see how much influence the name William F. Buckley has. Picks up a phone with his other hand, dials the television central in St. Thomas and says, it's William F. Buckley, Jr., my friend missed the first 15 minutes. Would you run it back? And on the screen, the Wizard of Oz went backwards, 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 backwards.
That
And
is
started
fantastic.
over, and Clurman told all his friends for years until Buckley revealed that the whole thing he was doing with his other hand on his tape machine.
That's a great story. That is fantastic. Can anyone top that? Either somebody who got him into the State Department or who was on his yacht with him. No.
I have a question back here.
Yes.
It's Alec.
Voice of God, Alec.
No. Now, I want to ask the filmmakers, did Buckley, did this affect his public record after he is recorded saying this? Did it affect his stance on issues? How did he come out on gay rights in his subsequent career? Did he shy away from that? Was he
I think
ostracized from that
it's a
community?
complicated answer. You know, later in life, during the AIDS crisis, he suggested that males who were gay should have a tattoo. And there was a lot of offense taken by that, as there should have been, I think. And
On their
So he's 2
forehead
for
or-
2 is what you're saying. He's 2 for 2.
let's go. Let's see if we can't get this 3 for 3. He said, someone asked him, well, what should the tattoo be? and he said on the anus it should be written, "Beware all who enter." Now-
and he said that where?
That I don't know. But I do know this, which is what makes it complicated, that his wife was a fundraiser for many of the art institutions in Manhattan, that their salon, their household, they often hosted many gay men. He said it was once said that 10% of Manhattan was gay, but then a new statistic came out and said it's 1%. And he said, if it's 1%, I know all, whatever the number was, I know all 10,000 of them. And so he was happy to, it was happy to entertain gays on a personal basis. And this was seems to be more a philosophical or religious prohibition he felt. So complicated.
I think Bill, who was genuinely witty, I guess everybody knows that some woman wrote him a nasty letter saying, cancel my subscription to your magazine. And he wrote back, cancel your own damn subscription. But I think he... Why didn't we think of that? I think he envied Gore's wit. And my guess is that he wishes he had said at least one thing that Gore said famously about life. Success is not enough. One's friends must fail.
Although, again, when I say that I feel closer or what I'd rather hang out with Buckley, Vidal is, yes, famously said that, but one has the sense that he absolutely felt and believed that was not just a witticism.
He said, every time a friend of mine has a success, I die a little.
Yes.
Another wording of the same thought.
Yeah, and if you look underneath my cold, hard exterior, you'll find ice water underneath.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not a shtick for him. I think it really was
Yes.
who he was. And I think, in fact, there are probably a number of sequels we could do this film of Gore and his enemies, Gore and Truman Capote, Gore and Norman Mailer. He had a long list of enemies. Buckley was at the top, but it was something I think he lived off of, in a way.
If we have any other questions, we probably have time for one.
Any good impersonal questions?
Or impersonations.
What is the capital of North Dakota?
It's Minot. And thank you very much to Cavett, Robert Gordon,
Thank you.
Morgan Neville.